Thank you. Well, and now the time is 9:30, so I think we can open this third edition of our A2i Talk. This time we're setting a focus on the agribusiness sector in Eastern Africa. And I'm glad to see here we've got Karina Bech, Head of Trade and Business Development at the Danish Embassy in Kenya. And as far as I can see, also a few colleagues also joining in for this call today. So good seeing all of you in Nairobi. Thank you so much for being part of this. Again, with the A2i talks, we try to come up with some inspirational talks and recent updates throughout our network. And of course, with our focus and main activities in Eastern Africa, I'm very happy to see and for the engagement from the Danish Embassy. It's also a part of the work that we've been doing together with the 1/3 group. As a part of where we've been focusing on developing an analysis of the green growth and agro-business opportunities especially in Kenya, but you'll get back to that. So as usual, the format is basically that now I'll hand over the floor or the screen as it is today, to Karina Bech and the team for a short introduction and a brief update on the status in Kenya, Eastern Africa, and then releasing more into the study that's been conducted on agro-business opportunities in Kenya. Following to that, we usually try to open the floor. The first two times we targeted 30 minutes, but it seems to be a bit too short. So for the session today here, we foresee that we got the floor open or the screen open, following in about 15 to 20 minutes, depending on the interest and also questions coming from the audience. From my side, I'll try to do my best in order to organize, so to speak, the conversation, and feel free to use the chat during the presentation from Karina, and then I'll do my best to navigate the following conversation. So without further ado, and again, Karina, Bech, and team, thank you so much for being here today. I think we're all looking forward to the call and this presentation. So thank you so much for taking your time, and hand over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jacob. So welcome everyone. I see we have roughly around 20 participants, which is of course wonderful to see. Welcome as well from the team here in Kenya. As Jacob mentioned, I'm the head of trade for the team here, and we have a team of around 6 people in the business team, 2 senior commercial advisors, Carol on my right, and we have Eric here on my left for the commercial side, and then we have sector specialists across the board. One of whom is also joining us today for our food and agriculture. That is Henning Nygaard, who is also on the call and will be joining in on the Q&A session. So without further ado, I'll just put a few words to what we're working on here at the Embassy, so you have a bit of context for those of you who may not have worked with the Trade Council before or the team here. So as I said, we're a team of 6 people, 2 senior commercial advisors that work across various sectors. So Carol is working mainly within water and health, and of course other activities as relevant. Carol has been the lead on the survey and the analysis that we'll be sharing insights on today. And then Eric is lead on food and agriculture and energy. And then I'm working on our digitalization and tech efforts as part of my portfolio. So that's broadly the headlines that we have. Food and agri is of course a broad one in itself. So we are looking at food loss, which is what the presentation today will be focused on. We're looking at ingredients, and we are also working within agriculture, which are some of the sectors that we've gained some particular insights on. So that's the general background. But what I'll do now is I will just share my screen, and then we will just move to the presentation. Jacob, I hope everything as before is working.
We can see it for sure. Thank you.
Great. So as I just mentioned, and as Jacob alluded to, we have been conducting an analysis together with local consultants to investigate business opportunities within the post-harvest loss area, looking particularly at 2 of the key value chains within the agriculture sector here in Kenya, that being horticulture and maize. So those are the value chains that we'll be focusing on today, and post-harvest loss is the main theme. So just a brief overview. I will just quickly give you a very high-level context for why horticulture and maize is specifically relevant and important to Kenya. Some brief background on the domestic horticulture and maize farming here in Kenya. Carol will then take you through the value chain of each of the subsectors, and then we will wrap up with the specific business opportunities. We will try to be as brief as we can, and then from there we'll open the floor for Q&A following that. Yes. And also, Jacob, I'll let you manage the chat, but if there's any questions along the way, please just send them through. That also helps the dynamics of these virtual calls, so please feel free. As some of you may already know, sort of the agriculture sector is a mainstay and hugely important for the overall economy in Kenya, roughly contributing about a third basically of the GDP, and is a huge source of job creation. For these reasons, it is also a high priority for the government in Kenya and policy development within this area. So as I already mentioned, horticulture is one of the largest subsectors. Others to be mentioned are dairy and tea as well. But it's truly not to be understated, the importance of this particular subsector in Kenya, also looking from an export perspective. Connecting the horticulture value chain with international value chains is one of the key sources for export earnings into Kenya. It's also something to think about when we're in the supermarkets around Europe. A lot of the vegetables and horticulture products that we find in our own supermarkets are coming from Kenya. So that is sort of putting the horticulture subsector into a bit of context and why we've chosen to look into it a bit further. Maize is maybe not in international value chain something that we see a lot and have a direct coupling with for our European markets, but maize is the most important staple food in Kenya, and it's something that not only is in terms of source and food security hugely important, but it's also again something that is grown almost to 100% across the smallholder farmers in Kenya. Again, a source of employment, but also of particular produce for food security here. So these are some of the reasons and the context for actually honing in on these two subsectors and trying to identify what business opportunities lay there, but also how we may play a role in actually improving the food loss that also is quite significant within both of these sectors. So the main commodities that we're looking at in this sectors are bananas, tomatoes, mango, kale, cabbage, and avocado. I think particularly on the avocado side, it's something that to keep in mind. There's been a huge surge in demand for avocado, which has also increased the production here in Kenya. It's something that's highly resource intensive and does require a very efficient value chain to actually bring it to international markets. There is, however, overall across these produce, again, a high loss percentage. It does vary across the different produce, whether it's tubs like onions and potatoes or vegetables, for instance. But as you can see, 50%, sometimes more, sometimes a little less, is quite significant in terms of ensuring the produce actually gets to market. As some of you may know, supply chains are quite unstructured, bringing it from the farm level to actual marketing and to markets. They can be quite fragmented. Supply chains are, of course, some are formal and some will be of a more informal nature, which also further complicates the coordination and hence ensuring that you have a succinct supply chain that reduces food loss. As you go through the value chain, I won't go into specifics because Carol will be going through that in just a few minutes, but the general gist is that you have your specific nodes as you do in most supply chains, but here what you'll see is the incentives along the supply chains for actually reducing food loss differ quite a lot, and hence the risk is also quite different depending on where you are in the supply chain, which in reverse then contributes to the post-harvest loss amounts. I think the last point to mention is that one of the incentives in terms of actually investing and ensuring whether it's storage or transport, cooled or chilled transport along the way, really has a lot to do with how long you are going to be holding or handling the given produce in question. Excuse me just one moment. We're on a webinar, so please, thank you. Apologies. But so one of the key incentives in terms of whether or not you make investments into the right storage facilities and for instance, trucking and transport logistics infrastructure really has to do with how long you are responsible for the produce and hence your risk exposure for the losses. Yes. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, maize, hugely important staple food for the population here in Kenya, mainly produced as a staple crop for basically almost 100% of the smallholder farmers that are here. One thing I think to really hone in on is the fact that local production is growing. However, it is still not enough to actually meet the demand in the market, which of course also incentivizes the need for identifying the solutions to reduce the post-harvest losses along the value chain to then better be able to meet the local demand and reduce the potential reliance on imports within the sector. So those were some of the main highlights and a bit of context of why these two subsectors are particularly important. I will now leave the floor to Carol to go into a bit more in depth on the two value chains as well. So I will do.
Yeah, so good morning, everyone. My name is Carol, the Senior Commercial Advisor here at the Embassy. So just to take you through the value chain of the horticulture, the main areas are within production, aggregation, and the processing. And then in between, we have transport and then the markets, which will be both local and international or export market. So during in the midst of this value chain, we have some opportunities for companies that then they can come in and probably invest in them. In production, we have an issue in terms of harvesting and also the seeds that are actually used for the different types that of horticulture that Karina has mentioned. So we have issues with hand harvesting. So something like machinery that can be used in this sector will be something that would come in highly in demand for the small scale farmers. However, for the export sector, it's very mechanized. So they are already using highly advanced machines, mostly from Europe and from the US. So this is not an area for the export side that might come with that potential. For aggregation, you'll find that in Kenya, we don't have big farms that produce the horticulture. It's many small scale holders and a lot of businesses, both for export and local supply chains such as supermarkets and so on. They don't like dealing with individual farmers. That's where the aggregators come in. So the aggregators collect all the produce from different small scale holders, and they're the ones who then supply to the big warehouses and the exporters. And for them, we have an opportunity, especially for cold storage and storage crates and plastic gunny bags. Then we find like at the end in the processing to give the products more shelf life, we have an issue in Kenya where we are not really doing value addition to our horticultural products. This is an unexplored area. We have like maybe 3 or 4 factories that are currently doing this. And the reason for the local market is because we have availability of sunshine all year round, which means we have produce all year round. However, this is an interesting possibility for the export market. Things like such potato chips, kale chips, processing tomatoes into tomato purees and sauces. But this is very underdeveloped in Kenya. We are barely doing it. So that's a great potential for companies that are looking for, you know, ingredients for further processing of goods or just snacks and so on of products such as mangoes and so on. And then for the transport, we have an issue with regarding to how the things can be carried from the farmers themselves to the aggregators, and also from the aggregators to the end customer. So we have issues with insulated trucks, the crates that are actually to transport the goods and so on. And this is one of the things that leads to a lot of the post-harvest loss. Move to the next one. In the maize value chain, the issue is mostly from the very start. The seeds that we have are not necessarily the best, because then they are affected by agents such as termites and birds eating them. So if we could get advanced seeds which are coated with some sort of product that then ensures this does not happen, that will be something that a lot of small scale farmers will be interested in. When it comes to harvesting, we still rely on manual harvesting. This means that people, small scale farmers, actually hire hired hands, like actual people, and they go and break the maize stalks from the farm. So you can imagine how intensive that is. And that also means there's a lot of breakage and loss from that. And then further on, when it comes to transport, there's more pressure because all the maize is just piled into big trucks. And then the worst part now, where we have, I think, up to 80% of our post-harvest loss in maize, is when we come to storage. The maize is not dried well enough because we depend on the sun to dry this. And this leads to microbes and toxins, and especially aflatoxin, which is a big issue in Kenya that we are trying to deal with. So basically, the area that needs a lot of investment here is on-farm drying equipment and storage material to ensure that once the maize is dried, it's stored in material that will ensure no toxins come in, and then we can deal with the issue of aflatoxin, which the government is super keen on addressing because we've had quite a number of deaths from products that has aflatoxin. And this is not just from the maize value chain, it extends further into the food value chain in general, because the animals, the maize that is considered to have aflatoxin is then fed to the cows. This seeps into the milk and then goes into further, poisoning further along into different value chains of the food sector. So yeah, and just I've already touched on some of the business cases of areas we can invest in, but this is something that when you reach out to us, we can talk in depth because we are limited with time today. However, we have cold storage is an issue that needs to be addressed here in Kenya. So we are looking for organizations or companies in Denmark that provide innovative solutions and not the normal, just the refrigerated trucks and so on, because we have a lot of small scale farmers. So the solution has to be customized to the small scale holders who are the main suppliers here in Kenya. We also look for small scale harvesting technologies for tubers and onions, tubers such as potatoes and onions, and also fruits such as avocado and mango. As Karina has mentioned, avocado is really picking up right now in Kenya, but we are not producing to our potential. We can do so much better if we had the technologies to help us. And then packaging and logistics, just to ensure that the things are packaged in an efficient manner and they will reach where they are going, especially for the export market, when they are still in a state that the customers will want to buy them. But there are demand drivers for this, and this is length of time. Yes, there are business opportunities, but then the demand is according to the different people in the value chain. For instance, the aggregators might not be the best people to target because they don't keep produce for the longest time. And also the value, the risk profile increases depending on where you are in the value chain. The small scale holders might not necessarily be able to invest individually, but if they are formalized into a circle or a cooperative, then they are able to invest together jointly because then they can afford the technologies, but we cannot target individual markets, individual farmers. When we go to the maize value chain, it's mostly about drying and storage, as I'd mentioned before. So there's a big push right now for hematic storage bags technology. We have some of it in Kenya right now, but we are still not at the front of it, like at the the leading technology. So we're still open for more. And then for the mobile maize drying technology, the government is investing in this quite heavily. And right now we have some mobile dryers, but they're not working as expected because they're super bulky and they cannot be used by the small scale farmers efficiently. So if we can find opportunities for small scale farmers to have affordable and mobile dryers, that is definitely an opportunity for any Danish company basically that is in this sector, and also for storage. And that's a wide market, because then they can be stocked in any warehouse, in any small shop, in the small villages and so on. So it's just looking at what technologies that can be used efficiently and are affordable to the small scale farmers, and not just a solution for maize, but this has to be something that can also be used with other grains such as beans and peas and lentils and so on. So that's it from my end. Yes, yep. Thank you.
I think we've, the aim has been to try to present a rather quick sum up with 15-20 minutes, so that opens the floor for questions and dialogue and discussions, yeah, Jacob, will you be the chair of that discussion?
I'll do my best. And now, well, first of all, thank you so much for this very elaborate presentation, but also to the point. I think it's quite evident that there's both a demand side and also that we got some technologies already in place that could fit into the value chain that you're describing. But perhaps in order to get the discussion going, could you elaborate a bit more on the, you were talking about the customers. So who's the customer throughout these value chains? And I think there might be several. But again, you're talking about the SACCOs and cooperatives and so. And in principle, that could open some opportunities. But have you seen any good examples where you actually been able to meet both customer demands and build up, both bringing in the technology, but also bringing in a financing plan that is actually feasible in the Kenyan market? Because I think that's one of the challenges that we're often facing.
Yes. So I think there's a couple of things to that. I think if you're looking at the sort of the structure of the value chains is really to identify critical mass, right? So where is there enough volume in terms of, for instance, if you're looking at the farmer side, and Carol mentioned it on the SACCOs, I think finding the right aggregators where there's enough volume for it to be an interesting value or business case is one sort of the first step. Secondly, in terms of customers, it will really depend on the solution you're looking at. For something like the formal supermarket chains, they are some of the ones that are actually investing in the cold storage and investing across the value chain, because they are the ones that have to have insurance of produce that comes to market. So taking that as a starting point and then identifying the partners that are along the value chain that they're operating in is one of the steps that would sort of be a natural next step from where we are, now that we have the analysis out and some of the original insights. I think that's the first place to start for the horticulture value chain specifically. When it comes to financing partners, it's one of the things, of course, that we're also working on figuring out how we can bring in a partner like EKF and other development partners that are in the market that may be investing in these some of these projects already that are engaged, and is there a way for us to position Danish solutions within those financing options? I don't have a specific answer to what that equation could look like. A lot will also depend on the Danish solution. Is it a smaller, larger company? What is the experience of operating in this market? Which I don't think we're going to pretend that that's an easy feat always. That will take time, and it does require commitment from a given company looking to tap into not just Kenya, but the region. So that will be a more bespoke exercise from where we are now. But identifying, like I said, in terms of the demand drivers, how long is the produce being kept and who has a structured approach to the value chain? One of the things to mention there is also there is a bit of sort of a risk moving around in this value chain. a lot of risk is sort of pushed further down the value chain. So starting a bit further down, for instance, with the supermarkets or some of the larger partners that they have in terms of sourcing, is where you will find less risk, and hence potentially also some of the right partners to start dialogue with.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know, Henning or Carol, if you guys want to add in, please feel free. We have Henning is on the call, but in a different location. So
Corona happened safely. Yeah.
I can chip in if it's
yeah, please do.
Okay with you, Jacob.
Yeah, please do so. Thank you, Henning.
Okay. Henning Nygaard here, Sector Council for Food and Agriculture at the Embassy. But just a little add-on to how the market looks in Kenya. The market is quite special compared to Denmark or what we know from Europe, because the export market and the local market is two completely different things, and it's also being regulated differently, which is not necessarily a good thing, because we have many more requirements for the European market. That also means institutions and the whole value chain is being managed differently, especially when we talk about horticulture, flowers, and so on. But for horticulture, the whole export value chain is quite well organized, and also the food loss and waste is less than on the local market. We have a number of very big traders in horticulture for the European market. Very often they also have their own farms. They're quite big, but a number of them also operate with small-scale farmers that they try to organize, as Carol said, through Cooperative, trying to train them in standards for sowing and harvesting, storage locally at the farm gate, and also to reduce the food loss here. So of course, some of these big exporters, they have the financial strength to go in and invest if there is a customer in the other end and they can see a potential business case in it. So that type of cooperation is very different from the local market that Karina is talking about, the growing retail chains we have in Kenya. So I would say there's a number of untapped potentials in both sectors here, but they are different. And there's much more loss on the local market because of all the issues that Carol is mentioning, especially in transportation from harvest to the retail chain. And here there is actually there is a capital and there is customers in Kenya. They can also pay for new technology if there is a business case, and that needs a more closer investigation and dialogue with us and with potential customers. Yeah, just to clarify this. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And now I see there's a few questions coming from the audience. Kasper Mejland, I don't know if you want to present, and perhaps Karen, if I could ask you to unshare your presentation so we can see the different participants at this call. Kasper, would you like to step in?
Yeah, sure. Kasper Mejland from the Danish EPA here. Usually we are focusing also on the waste part of this. This is also part of the circular economy, you might say. And I'm just interested to know, like, what actually, have you ever done any research upon the losses? What happens to the losses? Because I mean, let's say you have some bananas and they actually used as animal fed afterwards. Then perhaps it's not the worst way to utilize the waste, but it's more if it's just being deposited, or what do I know? That of course then it's a shame in all aspects. So I'm just wondering if you have looked into that. Thank you.
I think I'll let Carol and share a bit initially, and then we can.
The one area where we know at least what happens to the losses is more on the maize sector. So a lot of the losses when the maize is declared unfit for human consumption, because they will take it to the big parastatal in Kenya, which buys the maize from the farmers, and they do test it sometimes for aflatoxin. It's taken back to be animal feed. So that does not, that's why it then goes into now this other, like the dairy value chain, because now it ends up in the milk. So for maize, we know that then it's used again as animal feed, and not just for cattle, but also for chicken and all types of birds. For the fruits and vegetables, in at least a lot of markets, they really just throw it out. Like it rots out there and it's collected and it's thrown out. Of course, some people will come and take some of it to go feed their animals, but you'll find that a lot of these aggregator markets are within areas where these fruits and veggies are growing. So these small scale farmers already have a lot of this produce in their farms. They are feeding their animals, avocado when it's avocado season. They're feeding their animals, the ones that are not being bought. So whatever ends up as waste at the market and it's not accepted, it just rots and it ends up in the general garbage disposal system. Yeah.
So, and if I may jump in, it's just a question coming from Ole. And he's asking, is there any good cases on the local market for dried fruits? Because one could think that if there's abundance of fruits at any given season, you would be obvious to dry it.
I know, but unfortunately also the Kenyan palate, we're not used to dried fruits. So okay. Yes, we have seasonality of fruits, but all year round, we basically have access to very succulent fruits all year round. So getting a regular Kenyan to eat dried fruits is very hard. So that will be a potential for export and not the local markets.
Okay, right, thank you. And then I noticed, yeah, sorry, yeah.
If I could just add to what my colleague has said, it's right, our palate really prefers the fresh fruit. But we do have an example at Machakos County where they dry the mangoes, turn it into powder, but that's also mainly for export, as Carol has mentioned.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, sorry. Add a quick example as well. I think there are sort of small scale, or rather, some of it is small, some of it is rather big, but maybe not yet profitable. Examples of where you're using waste, vegetable and fruit waste to then actually grow insects that is then turned into protein powder that you then use for an export market. This is still some of the example. There's one of our partners here who has a sort of a side business that they're starting to build and explore in this area, and there is a larger Dutch producer here that has started that on a bigger scale, but it is still fairly experimental. So I think the sort of for dried fruit, I think I agree, it would be potential value added processing here, and then you can export it onwards.
Okay. I also see from Karsten from Danish Embassy, Karsten, that you got a question in terms of the cooperative performance. I don't know if you want to jump in.
No, it's just a general question. I just want to know, what is the status in 2021 with SACCOs and cooperative societies in Kenya? Are they able and willing to invest in this the new technology from Denmark? And is there an ecosystem also in place in the local banking system or other means, microfinance, etc.? Please.
Well, thank you, Karsten. So I think on sort of the overall performance of SACCOs, I won't try to pretend that I'm an expert on sort of the general financial status of the SACCOs. It is, however, an important tool, as I'm sure you know, in terms of actually aggregating enough volume and supporting the farmers in getting their produce from A to B. On the financing side, we are currently in dialogue actually with several of the commercial banks to better understand the financial service industry here. And two of the main points that are coming out is that the SACCOs and the general you know, the unbanked, if you will. I know that's maybe an overused term, but the official or the corporate and commercial banking sector is quite focused on figuring out how to provide services and financing products to this part of the Kenyan consumer base. Basically, it is still not a nut that they've cracked. They have, however, realized that the volume of the transactions and the velocity of money that changes hands within this segment is something that they need to figure out how to service and how to service meaningfully. And it's a huge focus for them to figure out how they get to be a part of providing solutions for this segment. There is a bank here called Kenya Cooperative Bank, and it's actually, I believe it's 64% of the ownership of that bank is SACCOs. So it's basically in Danish an andelskasse. And so they service, you know, regular corporate clients, and they serve private citizens and consumers. And then they have this separate customer group that is the SACCOs. And it's a key focus for them to figure out how they better serve the SACCOs as a specific customer segment based on the needs of their business. Yes, so that's the general information we have on the financing side. So I think it's something that we'll see them try to innovate around, and the SMEs is really a key focus for the entire corporate banking sector to figure out how to better service them.
Thank you for that. Thomas Augustinus, I also see you got a questions, if you would like to jump in.
Yes. So my question relates very broadly to the agribusiness sector. So I'm just curious to know what is the extent of foreign companies that supports the sector with products that either enhance post-harvest processing or prevent post-harvest loss? Is it typically kind of companies that are from the African continent, or do you see a lot of foreign companies trying to enter this market?
Thank you for that, Thomas. So generally, we do have some of the current supplier information covered in the analysis, and I think overall we're seeing that it's a bit mixed. There's both European, Chinese, and Indian suppliers in the sector. There's also there is a lot of the donor partner projects and development going on in Kenya, and so there are also specific projects that are supported by donor partners where their given project is then supplied by their particular market suppliers. For instance, if it's a German project, there may be German suppliers actually involved in that project. Yeah, so it is international, mainly companies that are involved. And some of those details, if you're interested, we can also dive into that a bit deeper at some point.
Right. Thank you. I think we're getting into closing the session, but I see there's also a question from Jens Olsen. He's also talking about, he's of course interested in the most profitable businesses in the value chain. So could we ask you to just perhaps Jens, if you want to jump in?
Yeah, well, thank you first of all for setting up this this event. It's really interesting insights. It's not the most profitable enterprises. I'm looking at the potentials in the value chain. So okay. I'm just afraid that if all the potentials are at the primary producers, where we have dispersed production, very low buying power, then it will be very, very difficult to derive all these benefits. So if there's any studies or any insights on the profits in the value chain.
Thank you. I think so one of the things that we identified, and Henning, also feel free to jump in to complement or add on, but I think one of the things we identified is there is sort of a structure in the system where risk is sort of pushed a bit further down. So the risk in terms of if you're in the supermarket, for instance, they only pay for the produce that they actually sell. So that sort of pushes your risk further down the value chain. And that also impacts where the risk or where the money is basically to then actually build your business case. That being said, however, I think it's a complex structure, like Henning said as well. The international value chains are structured and they're formalized. There is a clear need, and if there is an exporter or a customer in Europe that will take a certain volume of goods, then there is also a way to identify what is the ability for a capex investment in XYZ, and that of course is the loop you want to identify at every point in the value chain. Yeah. And to be honest, it is, as Henning says, something you will have to look at. What is the solution you as a company have? What is the volume that you need or the scale you need in terms of input to actually make that a viable model? And then identifying where in the value chain do we see a volume of that size? If you're a transporter or you have transport solutions, you'll also need a certain volume, meaningful volume, to be put in your trucks from A to B in order to make it, make your return on investment reasonable within whatever 5 to 10 years, whatever your horizon is. So a clear-cut sort of answer on that really depends on many variables that you'll have to identify. But I completely agree. You can't tap each individual small farmers. It's basically impossible because there's too many. But finding, for instance, the right cooperatives or SACOs that will allow you to aggregate the volume, maybe combining that with financing solutions. For instance, like I said, some of the banks are looking to find out how they can help them grow their business. And while that's not directly related to this project, it is something that could potentially prove interesting as we move forward, right? I know that's a very broad and somewhat vague answer, but we do need to sort of have a bit of time to investigate the Danish solutions and appetite as well, because when you look in this region, you also have to be willing to sort of devote the time and some money to investigate in what makes sense for your business and the customers, right? It's not Germany and a quick fix.
True.
Can I add something to this question, Jacob?
Yeah, please, just shortly. Thank you.
Thank you. Try to do it short. It's a very good question. And we have seen a number of different examples here. I mean, we have Olale also working on a program here to produce, like they're doing many other countries, pulp for their own input in Europe or other places, and they are actually utilizing bananas that would go to waste. So it is possible and utilize and make a profit in this part of the value chain if you can grab a larger part of the value chain yourself, that you're the own customer. So that's one case. Another case we discussed with different partners is in the case of dried fruit that we were discussing before, and also use of, for example, tomatoes in further value addition, ketchup, and so on. Super difficult. Here there is actually a market in Europe, and the customers are there, but the organization down to the smallhold farmers, to the SACOs, that's where the risk is. And if you can manage to organize that with stakeholders that are very close to the farmers and have a really good logistics setup, then you will have a really good business case in this area. So it was just to come with two examples where I can see that there's really a potential, but it depends on how close you are to the market and how you can organize the value chain. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for that. And getting back also to Karina's point, I think what we've seen here today is really a first step in entering into the African market. It's not business as usual, and I think we're all fully aware of that. So Karina and team, thank you so much for taking your time today and presenting this really substantial report. From our side, we'll for sure do our best to continue the conversation, both with the embassy and also our other colleagues in the East African continent. So, and what we're looking into is also to see if we can identify some of the funding needed really to get going, because that's often what we see for a number of the Danish company, that the potential is there, the demand is there, we often got the technologies in place, but really we need the risk, first initial risk financing to get going. So we'll continue on that part, not only in terms of the conversations that we are hosting with Danita, and hopefully in April we're looking into a follow-up call with Danita in order to present some of the challenges on finance, but also with our dialogue with the business authorities in Denmark, where we see new grants coming up. So thank you so much, Karina, for now, and also thank you to the audience. Hopefully we'll see you again in April. By next time we'll have Mathilde Byskov jumping in with the presentation on some of the market potential that we could see and how to harness them within the UN system. So that might be also worthwhile putting save the dates on the 9th of April. We'll of course also put into our following presentations and share them with you. Finally, for the Access to Innovation members, please be aware that we are hosting a pitch session with a number of private investors here in Denmark on the 7th of April. So for those of you that might have an interest, well, reach out so we can get you on board. Yeah, and finally, again, Karina, thank you so much for taking your time.
Thank you for having us. And just to wrap up, of course, everyone is welcome to reach out to us here, also to get more insights on the report and the analysis than we could share in this time frame. And we're happy to engage on any questions that you might have. I'm sure Jacob has all my contact details. Otherwise, find me on LinkedIn and we'll connect there.
I'll share the info following.
Everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much, and well, all the best, and enjoy the weekend. Thank you for now.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thanks.